And good evening, folks. Welcome back. This is Hajim Zero here, back with another quick movie review. This one's kind of one of my favorites by Tarantino. This is Django Unchained, and it's based off of another known movie with the same title. Of course, there were some changes, and it really, unlike Jackie Brown and Inglourious Basterds, it's another one. I think this is the one that he really took the most and reflavored it, to his extent, because there are also other references to other westerns, and even that shot you just saw there, Leonardo DiCaprio. I don't know who came up with it first. If it could have been the westerns, but you see a lot of those in kung fu movies, and you see the same similar shot in Kill Bill, especially when Uma Thurman does something. But this movie stars Jamie Foxx, Christoph Waltz, Samuel Jackson, Kerry Washington, Leonardo DiCaprio. I can't remember the name of that dude who was in Miami Vice, the original Miami Vice. He plays one of the plantation owners in Tennessee when they go after their first bounty. Jonas Hill has a cameo in this, and there's a few other actors who you would think would or known or they have character. Oh, and James Remar too. It was two other female characters or actors that were in this movie, but it looked like they would get some kind of shine, and they didn't. One of them was in the town, I think, after Django was freed, and I know I've seen her before. She looked like Danielle Panabaker, but I know it wasn't her. She was like this redhead, white chick looking through the window, but I know I've seen her before. And they had the camera on her for a long time going through the town. And then it was one of the slave hunters. She was a female too with the red bandana on her face. So pretty much this one is kind of a rescue story a little bit throughout this movie takes place 2 years before the Civil War. It takes place in pretty much the south part of the United States, pretty much from where Texas and on that belt going to Tennessee. But it's technically, oh yeah, it's in three states: Texas, Mississippi, and Tennessee. But kind of funny because I never been on the west coast of the United States yet, and only as far as I've been is to Texas, and pretty much all the way up to like Jersey, and that's just only. And of course, I've been to Cuba, but those are the only places I've been to. So it's those main three hitting somewhat slave and racist hick states, especially Tennessee and Mississippi. But again, this is a little bit of somewhat of a alternative take on slavery a little bit. The only real life slave I can think of that did something similar to what Django did and fighting back, but he wasn't a bounty hunter, was Nat Turner. And again, that video's down on the list because I reviewed that. But the way they made this out to be was that he was a hero. And of course, with the Westerns, they always took place right around before World War II, I mean, not World War II, the Civil War. And a lot of critics, of course, Spike Lee had his criticism, but another funny criticism that Tarantino had got for this movie was the character that Christoph Waltz had played. Since of course this is more of a modern movie, they were trying to say how it would be no white guy like him would ever do what he did, in helping Django. And I was like, well, to be honest, it's kind of true. Now, the way it was done most necessarily wouldn't happen, but there were Germans back in that day that didn't like slavery at all, despite of what you might think. And then two, yeah, people were so fixated with what the stars were, they didn't even know the history of Westerns or what happened back in the day, despite of how things are a little bit mixed in this film. So, I'm not going to talk much about, with Spike Lee because I said that, with the other videos. But another cool thing about this movie, I'm going to talk about more of the story and then talk about some other stuff that a lot of people don't know about it. pretty much he's a bounty hunter. He's a slave, and then he's turned into a bounty hunter, and he gets a lot of luck, with his first, keeping with his shooting, of course. And then what Christoph Waltz tells him, you always keep the ticket of your first bounty, and it ends up saving his life. It was kind of slick how he had, messed with those Australian mining company people. And then, from then on, they're just racking up money so they can buy Broomhilda. And then the messed up part is that they were in the South, so they had to play this game. And then Leonardo DiCaprio got pit. Well, eventually, of course, with Stefan, which is Samuel Jackson's character, had snitched him out, pretty much saying, they're not here for the Mandingo fights. They're here to buy, that girl. And instead of doing it that way, because, they knew if they would have went to it straight up, the guy would have, Calvin would have tried something anyway. And they were trying to avoid that, but dude had snitched him out. So it is what it is. And then the funny thing, what I didn't notice in the very ending scene where he was tripping about that whole handshake thing, of how he had said, after all that paper signing, don't mean shit until you shake my hand. If you really think about it, if he would have shook his hand, and spoiler alert, if Christoph Waltz never would have shot Leo, his character, they would have killed him anyway, because if you realize all them dudes that came and rushed in as soon as the shooting had even started, and Django didn't even do anything yet, and they had them people with the ladders and all that, like pretty much they were waiting for him. And it just goes to show you that back then in the South, and even if you see 12 Years of a Slave, which was a much more serious slave film, it just showed how much the master, even if you did what you were supposed to do, they still, fuck with you anyway. Yeah, just to do it. Yeah. And, it's kind of funny how Spike Lee had criticized it, even though what had happened in that moment pretty much could have happened and it was true. But another scene that I liked, that of course a lot of people liked too, different interpretations, was the whole, skull bashing thing with the three dimples. I'm not going to talk about that, but the one scene I will talk about is when Leo himself said that, well, I think it was before, I think it was in the opening conversation about the skull, of how he openly admitted that the slaves had outnumbered them to 100 to 1. Why? And he even said, this slave right here, the skull head, he had took care of me and my daddy and my granddaddy for, years. And every day he used to shave him out there on the porch. And if you think about it, this goes back to the scene in The Color Purple where Celie was shaving Mister, and she was doing that job for a long time. And even when I watched it with my mom, how she said I would have slit your fucking throat, I was thinking the same thing too, especially when she eventually does accidentally cut him for a different reason because of the loud noise, and she couldn't stop because he would have been tripping. But, going back to what Calvin said, he was pretty much saying out of all that time of being mistreated, he never tried to slit his throat. And it was funny because he was dead serious, even though his lawyer was laughing, and he was thinking, this shit could happen, but it is a good poignant thing. It goes back to the whole Willie Lynch psychology. And then even when he talked about the skull, of how, the dimples were in the back, were in the section of people who are submissive and whatnot. And he was saying in a white person's skull that the dimples would be in the part of creativity and poignance and all that, which is complete bullshit, because the dimples don't really have that in the skull, don't have that control. It's really what's inside of your brain. And they even had proven this, neurologists, of how they say creativity and all that sits really in your brain. And he was talking about the skull, which, yeah, you can fool anybody with that bullshit back in the 1800s. Hell, you possibly fool some of them now because they don't do basic biology, but all that stuff he was talking about with the brain, it's everybody has that regardless of the color of your skin. So now to talk about some extra stuff, there's actually a comic book based on this that I personally have, and it was really the original script for the movie, but Tarantino, of course, changed a lot of stuff in it because it would have been a two-part movie like Kill Bill. And after reading it, I can definitely tell because it gave a little bit more layers to the character, and of course, some scenes were changed up a little bit. One of the things that stood out to me the most was that it was an extra character in there that originally had owned Broomhilda, which was Jamie Foxx's or Django's wife. And because in the movie he had already owned her, but if you read the comic book, she was actually owned by another dude, and he wasn't as vile. Pretty much, if Django would have caught up, then he definitely would have got her back, without really really easy. And of course, this dude had slept with her multiple times, or if you want to call it rape. In the movie, you never really see any of heavy sexual assault on, Broomhilda at all. And another scene that was also intriguing when they were talking about I think Christoph King Schultz had asked about Broomhilda and how she was German and all that, and he was telling a story about Broomhilda, and Siegfried is a German story. If you read the comic book, they gave more visual about that, like they drew out Broomhilda and Siegfried and the knight's armor and everything, and the ending a little bit was slightly different. Of course, the ending. Well, I will say this: them going off after killing everybody on the Candyland plantation, that had pretty much stayed the same. But there was a little kid that indirectly had helped Django. The shootout happened outside as opposed to the house, and even Steven had a gun back. It's just a little bit itty bitty things. Off the top of my head, I really can't remember, as I did read the book a while ago. And then another cool thing about this, and there's even rumors that there's going to be a sequel or a movie to this because they already did the comic book on this one too. The sequel to Django is in a comic book and is a crossover with Zorro at the same time. And what I really liked about this, even with Zorro, how it had the same history and fictional context at the same time, or non-fictional. I think I messed that up, but it was that when Mexico was about to buy California, and then the vigilante Zorro had existed. He was a Spaniard, and at first it fooled me because I thought it was Antonio Banderas's Alejandro, but it's really the original, Diego de la Vega, and him and Django team up even in the opening scene, and Django even says, "Yeah, I've been watching you for a while," and it's a lot of comparison to King Schultz and De La Vega, and it's how the two really had got along throughout the whole story. It was a 7-issue story, but the one I got, of course, it's all the issues together, and it's rumored that they're gonna make this actual movie because the mining company that Django's is going to be sold to is actually mentioned in that book. And besides Django and that's the whole connecting piece of it's a sequel. Um, the good thing about the crossover itself, it gave even additional characters more layers. I think that story was more about control of a certain part, I think, of California or Texas. I got to read it again, because the main selling point was the two of them being in it, and I kind of forgot about the main plot on top of that. It was a actual good plot in it, as well as the politics in the 1800s at that time. But hopefully they do make that movie. It would be nice to see either Antonio Banderas. It'll probably be him. I don't know if it'll be Anthony Hopkins playing De La Vega, or they just might recast a completely new Spanish or Latin actor. Benicio del Toro is another one I can think of who would come to mind in playing him. But it's a whole catalog. Even, or this might, you can argue with me on this. Even that dude in the next movie I'm about to watch, No Country for Old Men, the one that played the bounty hunter, he could possibly do it, but I haven't seen him in a role similar to what King Schultz played, because De La Vega, he was kind of like King Schultz. He had, a charisma, a nice, calm demeanor about him, even though how old as he was, in the book. But it was, I was lost for words on how good that crossover was, and it was so good. And the comic book shop I had went to, they didn't carry it; they had to order it for me, and I had told the cashier about it. And it was funny. He said that, yeah, I read about two of the issues, and then I knew. I was like, okay, I got to put your book back, and I got to order me one because the story was that good. And I was happy he liked it. It's in my collection now. So if they ever do make it, I might read it again. But pretty much is all I have to say. Another good thing I liked about this movie was the clothing, design. They were talking about the different clothing styles in this, and the most funny one that stood out to me the first time I saw it was the guy that from Miami Vice who played the Tennessee plantation owner, and they were saying behind the scenes, yeah, we gave him the more of like the Colonel Sanders look, the all white, and it's like as soon as there he is right now. As soon as I seen it, I immediately knew, that's what that was. Another known fact, the Mandingo fights that were also real back in the days, how they made some of the slaves fight each other versus them working in the field, which is kind of a fucked up thing. And it just goes back to what Calvin has said about, them overpowering, especially the black, the big black, males who are heavy built, knowing that one swing, they can break your neck if you just keep fucking with them in a certain way. Some more good things I like about behind the scenes of the movie. This is the first movie I seen Leo in where he played a bad guy. And even he said it was the most vile and racist character he ever played. And I think he had to be convinced by, I think, Tarantino to really play it, and then indirectly reconvinced by Samuel Jackson because of how many times he had to say the word nigger. And Samuel Jackson had told him, he was like, lighten up, motherfucker. This is another Tuesday for us. And the good thing is that I'm not really saying that, of course, Leo isn't a racist, but you know how they say some people in Hollywood, they're not really aware of the racism that's in this country and all this and that. I really believe Leo was because, and I'm just lightly saying this because he's worked with black actors before. He worked with the guy that was in Amistad and Blood Diamond, and he was the British and with the British accent, and he was over there, and how they were living in poverty and all that. So because he's done more humanitarian work. I think he adopted a few black kids, or he got them in a program or something like that where they live better lives. Yeah, so I can understand how hard it was for him, and then Sam was telling him to lighten up. And it was funny because I think Matt Damon had got some flack about, talking about, you know, black issues and this, that, and the other, but he was one dimensional coming at it. Again, he wasn't a racist, but he was just saying things that, you can tell that he never went to the hood or had to comprehend what black people in this country go through every other day, or really know how bad it really was. And despite this guy's very, very smart, so, and again, I kind of like Matt Damon, so I'm not gonna, take many pot shots at him, but it was funny, thinking about that, because I don't think Samuel Jackson was thinking the same thing, but a lot of people were saying of how many times the word was being said, but if you think about it, that's what happened back in the 1800s. Even in some of the advertising back then, they actually put it in there. The history books may fool you because they may choose certain selected signs like Negro or colored, but you would never see the sign that fully flat out say it as an Nigger. Even in some of the civil rights footage, back in like the 90s, or what you would see, it was very lighthearted. But nowadays we see that racist, artifacts. You go down into the King Center, you can find some of that stuff, and I think even some of the white only signs or in other museums, here in the South. Yeah, so, you know, it just sucks that even now and today how white folks usually tell black people to get over slavery or this, that, and the other when, the racism technically is still here. You know, even what I was saying in the Nat Turner narrative, about the patrolman, or I probably didn't say it, but I'm gonna say it now, like the patrolman that assaulted his wife, that was the first form of the police force, and it's still here today. Well, not the assault, but with the racism and this, that, and the other. But I will say that I think at a certain point, it didn't get that bad until a little bit more heavily in the modern era. Like I would say it's on and off, and now it's in full-fledged, drive. And politics did play a little bit in that. Some of the Republicans and Democrats are responsible. Yeah, so, you know, um, that's pretty much all I have to say about this film. Again, we could talk about it in the comment box. And I will see you guys on the next review. Talk to you later. Sayonara.